In terms of skills, we'd like our students, our children, our adolescents, our adults to be critical thinkers, to engage in reflective and independent thinking, to identify relevance, validity, and the importance of ideas using a rationale and intuitive process. They generate solutions and create new ways of thinking. If throughout this presentation you have questions, please don't hesitate to put up your hand. We have a series of slides and we'll get through them in a variety of different ways, but we'll see where the conversation needs to go. Okay, so here's our opportunity to do a bit of personal reflection right now. We're all different. Everybody's different. Our students, our adults, our educators. I'd like you to take a moment and just think for maybe a minute or two about what you do and how you feel when you make a mistake. And then if you're comfortable, I'd like you to turn to somebody who you don't know and actually engage in let's say a 1 or 2 minute conversation. So we'll just take 3 or 4 minutes for that.
Would anyone like to share some of their insights or a 1-sentence observation, conversation that you've had with someone? Anybody want to share? I'll share mine. Steve and I were just talking about the sort of sense of embarrassment when you make a mistake and that first, humiliation. But for me, when I was working with the provincial government, I went through the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the thing that I remember was the discussion about the emotional bank. And that everybody has this emotional bank account, and when you get positive rewards, it's really, really great. But if someone makes a withdrawal from that emotional bank account, just one withdrawal can empty that emotional bank account. So if someone betrays you or hurts your feelings, so I think mistakes, they have to be sort of contextualized, and you have to realize maybe, at least for me, I think relationships are most important. And so taking time with the relationship with my son or daughter, with the students in my class, with the teachers of my child, where I may feel, something is not going really well, I'm going to focus first on how do I make that relationship as positive as possible and not withdraw from that emotional bank account. Does anybody want to share anything? Yes.
It's very situational, so sometimes it's embarrassment, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's frustration. Depends on the nature of the mistake.
Yeah.
Should we have known how to avoid it or not? Very easy.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point, because when you make the same mistake over and over again, it's not embarrassing anymore. Then it's like you're frustrated with yourself because you keep making that same mistake over and over again instead of learning from it. Yeah, before we move on, I wanted to frame the concept of critical thinking. Being a high school teacher, I realize that students often have a different understanding of language than I do, and so I usually start with the whole concept of what is it to be a critical thinker? It does not mean to say everything is bad. Instead, it's a negotiation between what are the things that I take from this that I agree with, what are the things I don't agree with, but more importantly, you get to that higher order of why. You have support for disagreement in something. And I actually believe that young children have a really good sense of justice in the world, and it's kind of easy to get them through media to point out some of the injustices and the lack of representation of diversity and other things that media construct in terms of the real world that the media construct, which is very different than the real world that we live in. So I'm going to pass that over to Steve.
Thank you. One of the other presentations, I think today, is on pathways, and there's a fundamental question that they're going to be asking there about what kind of challenges or opportunities do you as a child, as a learner, want to sink your teeth into? And what do you have to do that? So that ties into critical thinking. I want to bring the conversation back to different kinds of mindsets. There's lots of research been done over the last couple of years, and we have learned so much about the human brain development in the last 10 or 15 years because of the developments in brain imaging. We can actually see the thinking process now. And you live and breathe it. We all live and breathe it as parents and as teachers. We see our kids when they're happy, when they're sad. We try to figure out what's happening inside their brains. The research is landing on a couple of pretty solid areas to think about. The first one is a notion or a belief of a fixed mindset. And these are some of the rules. It's Carol Dweck's work coming out of the States. And there have been lots of research studies with early adolescents, with preschoolers, with med students, with people in their 60s. That focuses on different kinds of mindsets. A fixed mindset is one where intelligence, we believe, is fixed. You're born with smarts. You're smart, right? That we tend to hide our mistakes. We might be embarrassed around those mistakes. I taught physics, so I taught kids, but I use physics to teach them. And the number of times when I say I taught physics, people saying, I wasn't very good at physics. I'm not a good artist. I can't speak publicly. Those are ways that our brain, our belief set is being modeled as a fixed mindset. I do it myself. But as Dr. Dawson talked this morning about metacognition, thinking about how we're thinking at our beliefs, about our beliefs. Sure.
Just before we move on, just a tiny story. Daphne's at first year university, and she sent me an interesting text late in November, and she said, and it took me by surprise, and I had to step back before I text back. And she said, Dad, are you still going to be proud of me if I don't get an A on my test? And I replied back thinking, as a parent, being proud has nothing to do about your scores at school. Like this is, I'm there to love you and support you and try to create out there. And as an educator, I try to get her into, when you're at university now, like it's time for you to start enjoying, do what you do your best effort, and enjoy the learning behind that. And you're going to get better, and the final result is not what I'm looking for. I want you to grow as an individual. So intelligence to me is also about growing, and that brings us to the next slide.
The second part of the research talks about growth mindset. And what we're noticing in society, and we've noticed this throughout our history, is people with a growth mindset who embrace learning and view mistakes or challenging situations as opportunities for information to learn are successful. We think of people who haven't been successful in a more traditional model. We think of people like Einstein. We think of people, you can think of sports people, you can think of a whole myriad of different examples, and you can think about yourself as well. When you have persevered through something, and it's not about doing the same thing over and getting the same result, right? It's about trying something. Try it again. That doesn't work. Try it from a different perspective. Try it from over here. A growth mindset. Embracing that challenge. And so when we're thinking about how our children can succeed in school and enjoy success, we have to understand that process as well. I've been at the kitchen table, with our daughters, so has my wife, with those emotions and those tears. And yes, right, where maybe I don't have the particular content skill to help my child there. But what I can do is say, you know what? This is an opportunity for us to learn together. This is an opportunity for you as my child to think about, okay, well, are you making the decision you're not good at this right now? Or are you willing to embrace, okay, what can I learn from this particular strategy I've used to solve this particular math problem? That didn't work, I don't get that piece. So my teacher said, or you gave me a suggestion as my parent to try this, I'm going to try that. Embrace that. So believing your abilities can be developed. Resilience is key, perseverance, effort, trying something new. And when we say effort, it doesn't mean doing the same thing over and over again. It means learning from that effort and then changing it up a little bit and trying a different angle. And then confronting mistakes, they are useful information for us to learn. You're going to see this, and you probably are seeing this in your child's classrooms as well. So it's back to the same question. How do we model? I know I've said certain things to my children that I need to think about in terms of a fixed mindset. And modeling, we talked about modeling a bit this morning. My behaviors as a parent around my children to persevere when things get tough, or when there's a great opportunity, and we're going to embrace that opportunity. You've probably noticed too that classrooms are changing. Picture on the left there might be. I think we did the activity this morning. Where's the front of the classroom? Can you see the front of the classroom here? On the left one. On the second one, though, and we think about our workplaces. Think about what's happening in society. We collaborate. We learn from one another. We try to, level the playing field. We tackle solutions together. We tackle challenges and embrace them together. And so we work very closely with our teachers across the system to talk about this. You're still going to see some classrooms like the ones on your left. And sometimes that's a useful strategy. And you're going to see classrooms like the ones on the right, both in kindergarten and in grade 12, and all the way along that journey. And if you're not seeing that, then ask the questions. I was reading through the curriculum, I was taking a look at it. Can you help me understand why I'm seeing this? That's what collaboration is. It's back and forth conversation. I'll give you a sec just to take a quick look at this. I'm not sure if you can read some of them. I'll pick a few things out. So the Ministry of Education has something called the Minister's Student Advisory Council. And there's an application process, and 70 students, grades 7 to 12, who represent our diverse student population across the province, get together once a year, and they work with the Ministry of Education. They have leadership camps. We've had a few representatives here in the OCDSB. And they essentially advise or have the ear of the Ministry of Education, and it's an opportunity for student voice. This was an exercise they did 2 years ago where they thought about what 21st century learning should look like, what their schools should look like. And of course they did the cartoon. I think this was a student that did this as well. So students imagine the future of Ontario's education system. And I don't know, but I see some of those things, and that's not how I went to school, right? The one that always I land on is this one. Why would I want to learn from someone who doesn't want to learn from me? How powerful is that? Our kid said that. One of our children said that. And so we have to listen to that as parents and as educators. What does their classroom environment look like? It's probably not the environment that we were educated in, because it's a different world. So the notion of student voice, and we heard about it this morning with brain development as well. Having our children take ownership of their actions and understanding where their thinking is at. So for you, going back to those original questions, what can I do as a parent? Well, I can understand that there needs to be an opportunity for student voice, for voice. I'm not sure, Denis or Melanie, if you want to add anything to that?
I was actually thinking about, when you were talking about the growth mindset, I see a fixed mindset sometimes around teachers when certain stereotypes are ascribed to people. And I'm on Twitter. I've been on Twitter since it first came out in 2008, mistakenly thinking it was a device that I could use to send lessons to students on their phones, and that they'd be walking along the street and pick up their phone, and there's Mrs. White giving them a media studies lesson. But anyway, I learned from that because I really believe strongly in the philosophy of play as a form of learning. So one of the younger teachers in a Twitter chat about education said that she goes to the younger teachers for advice on how to use technology in education. And so I said to her, thank you very much for complimenting me on how youthful I am, because I actually, even though I'm older and I'm near the end of my career, I really embrace technology, and I love that idea of trying out different things, and maybe it doesn't work, but it's something I think we all have to work on and look at. Am I in that fixed mindset, or am I in that growth mindset?
I referenced, and after the presentation, you're welcome to come up and take a look. All of these are online. These are some of our curriculum documents. And yes, absolutely, there is content expectations in here, right? We call them specific and overall expectations. And sometimes that's all we focus on. By the end of the course, the student shall demonstrate an understanding in this particular area. It's math, science, ecology, and so on, literature. But the first 30 to 40 pages of any ministry document also talks about the guiding beliefs and frameworks that we need to see in our classrooms. Some of the words are up there. You know, I think about financial literacy. Our kids need to be thinking about that. I think our kids need to be thinking about about environmental education. They need to be thinking about their own literacy and numeracy skills, about their career life plan. And so in your classrooms and in your homes, these are opportunities to be reading through these and looking at the parent role and having conversations with your children. As Dr. Dawson said this morning, what's your plan? Right? Asking those kind of questions, or engaging in conversations or critical thinking or inquiry. We think about full day learning, where our kids are learning from playing. And what does that look like in a grade 12 chemistry classroom? Right? Scientific investigation, inquiry. So there's a change in education that is here, and it's evolving, absolutely. But it looks slightly different than what you and I went through. Some of it's the same, some of it's not. So speaking positively about that at home, seeking understanding, that growth mindset. You know, this is not how I would have done it. How would you do it? Have you thought about this? Or working with your administrators and your teachers on that. I'm very cognizant of our time. Oh, we have a question, yes. The question is there any consideration for blurring the boundaries between subjects, between disciplines? And I think that's an opportunity that we have in terms of when let's say we're in a science classroom, or whether it's an English strand or a media strand in elementary or secondary, what does this look like in other subject areas? We do have elements of that both in elementary and secondary. Some of our programs, for example, the specialist high skills major, there are things called contextualized learning activities, and they're modules that basically say, what does English or literacy look like in a technology class or an environmental class? So while there's no formal program like that, we see elements of it, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yes? Absolutely. So I'm going to skip over one of these slides, this one here, and if anybody's interested in this story, I'm happy to have the conversation with you afterwards, a bit of your own inquiry about what this is. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Melanie, who might be able to guide you through that.
This seems like you set me up for this question, because that's exactly what I'm going to do, is try and get you some specific skills and strategies. So, you want me to have it quicker? So, when you're thinking about the world that young people inhabit, I think it's important to, especially for me as a teacher, I try and enter into their world as an observer, not there to judge, but to prompt critical thinking, to ask questions. So I have to sometimes hold my gag reflex on certain lyrics to songs, and I have to simply say, what do you think about that? And deconstruct or take apart those worlds that they are a part of. Dana Boyd wrote a book. She's a researcher, and I think she works for Microsoft, but it's a PDF online. It's called It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Network Teens. And it's kind of reassuring because I know there's a lot of media out there about how dangerous social media is, but she reassures us that you know, they're quite ethical. And I think there's a lot of evidence in the volunteerism of our students and how they feel about, you know, bringing refugees to Canada and that kind of social awareness of inclusiveness and wanting that in their schools. But to get back to media, there's two principles, I think, that if you just keep these in mind, they prompt you to ask questions, and that is that all media are constructions. It's called a news story, which means it's not reality. It means it is structured with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Even asking the question to say, okay, set your timer on your phone. This is supposed to be an in-depth news story. Let's time how long it is. Nowadays, an in-depth news story is 90 seconds. And then stepping back and saying, how do you think that was covered? Whose voice is there? Who's left out? What was shown? How was it shown? And simply having that conversation, I think, can happen at any age level. And the second is that all media contain values and beliefs. Absolutely nothing is neutral. We try to be objective in news, but it's impossible. And I tell my media studies students, I will never see the world from a male point of view. It's impossible. I can empathize, but I will always have a female bias. I will always have a white bias. I will always have a privileged bias from growing up in Canada. And we have to recognize those biases. They're not necessarily bad unless they inflict harm on people. So having a conversation about the fact that things contain these values and beliefs. So parents can begin conversations with children about the media that they experience in the world. And I would imagine many of you who may have come from other countries, when you think about the way your country is represented in the news, you would be able to have a really rich discussion with your child about the difference between the way the media presents your country and your personal lived experience. So I am going to also show you how you can use toys to go through the process of examining and deconstructing for these values and beliefs. So Steve, I'm going to get you to help me with. So this is an aerial doll. Visual texts have codes and conventions. So color is a code, and I often tell my students that back in Shakespeare's time, pink was the color for boys, and blue was the color for girls, because girls were sort of up in the clouds, Mary and Fairy, little angels, and pink is a precursor to red, which is blood. Somewhere along the way, we flipped that, so really this is just a color, but we now associate it with girls. And if you look at the sort of structure of this, it looks somewhat like a palace, and there's a 3+ here, which you probably know what that means. It's age, right? So you recognize, okay, so now that we've got this, I'm going to tell you a bit of background. In June 2003, 3 of my media studies students gave me this doll, and the doll says 3 things. Do you like my hair better when it's up or down? Do you think Prince Eric will notice my hair? And hey, would you help me fix my hair? So I asked my students, what is most important to this? And hair is the most important part of this doll. That is a value, that hair is really important. I also noticed that the 3 statements are all in questions, and they were all looking for the approval of someone else. Steve, I'm going to get you to hold this while so we do this thing called, it's referred to as culture jamming, where you change the narrative or you change the message. So instead, she's going to say, hey, I can fix my own computer, thanks. Do you like commercial or open source operating systems? And do you think Prince Eric will notice I fixed his computer? So we just flipped hair to computer, and then all of a sudden you have a completely different narrative related to gender.
Wonderful.
So this can be done also with television. You might want to ask questions like, what's the purpose of this? Who made it? Do you see yourself or your family in this? So when students go through the actual deconstruction, they break down every single element in this. So they'll look at the hand position and say, that is a code. Where does that code come from? Clearly from hip-hop culture. The hashtag is a code that comes from Twitter. The ring on the finger is a cultural code representing marriage. You can look in the background, the code of his hair, the code of the shirt. So breaking down all those elements and asking those kinds of questions, what does this mean? What does this stand for? Allows any age of student to think critically about the messages that are constructed, put together, and what are those values and beliefs.
Okay, we're going to stick to the, I think just with the arrow we should be good. We're going to stick to the practical because I think your question is right on. And I think what I want you to see in those images is a cultural shift about how educators and education is sort of shifting, and you as a parent can look at it a little differently to better support the learner. On the left is the basically what I consider the old schools when I went to school. And basically there was sort of this conception as we're learning, there's like more containers that we're getting. And sometimes a lot of learners are getting more anxious and they're failing well. It's getting more complex. Now, what we're trying to do in a lot of the curriculum areas is that we're shifting towards the right side, where basically we're trying to work on developing skills. So I'll talk to you a little bit about in language acquisition. That means that I'm not learning passé composé. I'm not learning les passés. I'm pretty sure for some of you, your remembrance or your memories of learning French was all about grammar. Learning lots of grammar, learning a lot of verbs, and trying to memorize all that stuff. And every year, feeling this is getting more and more and more complex. Part of what we're trying to do with the shift towards the skill is say, when we're supporting our learners, we're understanding that it's a different reality out there. And in language acquisition, basically we're looking at two sets of skills. On the one hand, we have reception skills. Well, we need to understand information and make sense from the information, so whether it is in written form or oral form. And then we have transmission skills, or basically the ability to communicate effectively by speaking or writing. So there's sort of a balance we need to have. So part of the work that we need to, or the discussions we need to do when we're engaging with our learners is to say, not what did you do in school today, but what did you learn in school today? And really, when you're having a discussion with the child, if you understand some of the elements, the basic elements or the big picture in the curriculum, is to say, when you're in your French class, how is oral comprehension going? How are you doing in that area? Where are the struggles? Where are the places we can do? And how can we support oral comprehension? If it's about reading and reading comprehension, so you move away a little bit from the containers and you move to the right and see how can we get the skills to fit in. And those skills in language acquisition will develop from K to 12. And actually they keep growing all your life. They don't stop because you're finished your course. The other element I want to show you is that how we're shifting from a traditional approach to sort of a little more modern approach towards developing skills. Back in the old days, some of you probably did a lot of worksheets. A lot of worksheets with verbs. And the theory behind the worksheets is that the more you did, the better you were. What we know from research is that doing more doesn't equal being better. A lot of people told me, oh, Denis did core French all the way to grade 12, can't do French. Or actually, what they're saying to me is that they haven't not developed a strong level of confidence in second language. So what we're trying to do now is we say, when we're developing learning activities, instead of doing verbs, passé composé or futur, we're going to play studio. We're going to be playing TSM. So on the first activity, we're going to talk about the hockey game last night. We're going to try to see, like, how did the Senators do last night? How did the Canadians make? Well, Maple Leafs is easy because usually there's a strong pattern there. But how did they do? And then when you are talking about what happened last night, you will need your verb in the passé composé. You will need to use that. But basically for learners, the focus is on the messaging, the communication aspect of it. What did I think about the game? Did Andrew Hammond play a good game last night? Is that the reason? And if I want to talk about the future, I'm going to ask them about, like, who's going to win the Super Bowl. So basically now we need to make predictions, we need to justify, and we go back also to the elements of critical thinking. It's not just about giving right or wrong answers anymore. It's about giving your point and making your point across, justifying. And that would be one of the last advice to you, is that when they're looking at content, it's deciding, like, how it makes sense to them, and justifying, not just about the answer.
Thank you. I want to also provide some resources. Again, the big picture. So understanding how our kids are developing and how our actions are supporting that development. Stepping Stones is a Ministry of Health and Child and Family Services partnership, and it's a document for understanding cognitive, physical, emotional, and social development of our children from early adolescence to late adolescence. I'm just going to quickly pull up the site while it's thinking there. As I said, as a dad of two 12-year-old daughters, when I look at resources like this and I look at the emotional piece, it doesn't seem to be coming up. Oh, there it is. So this is a website here, and if you just Google Stepping Stones, you can either find it or it'll be linked in the PowerPoint. But I just wanted to tell you a personal anecdote here, and maybe you've experienced this. Apparently, my 12-year-old daughters may be more emotional. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you have 12-year-olds. Apparently, they're going to get in more fights with me. Apparently, when they do well or do not so well, they're going to be really upset about that or really happy about that. And so what do I need to do on the right-hand side? Not take it personally. Right? What we have to understand is we're dealing with a different brain here. Quite often we say, and this goes back to your question, sir, understanding brain development. Sometimes we say, oh, it's just hormones. Well, it's not. It's a different brain. When we think of Dr. Dawson's slides from earlier, and it showed us what is happening in the thinking of our brains, believe it or not, 12-year-olds or adolescents are thinking mostly with their center of their brain. We have imaging to suggest that that center of the brain can really only hold 2 or 3 thoughts at any one time, which basically means I'm right, you're wrong. Right? So if our adolescents are thinking with that part of their brain, and sometimes I think of that, my daughter, we're having a disagreement, and all of a sudden I'm thinking with the center of my brain because I said so. Right? And that's a good part of the brain to think about when I need to make an either-or decision. But as an adult, I need to breathe and move the front of the thinking, or the thinking to the front of the brain, which can hold the executive functioning, 7 or 8 simultaneous thoughts. Understanding our children can't yet think like that, I think is going to affect how we deal with or support our children's learning, both in the classroom and at home. And so there's a resource for you. I'm not going to go through it with you, but I think it's important to understand that our kids are thinking differently. We thought this way once, but we don't think that way anymore. In terms of specifics, there are a couple of online documents around assessment. Assessment is certainly changing, and you've probably noticed that. There is still a focus on student product, but there's also a focus on observations and conversations from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. And we tend to assess more and evaluate less. And we tend to work with kids and say, rather than judging their work, we get them to think about their work and provide descriptive feedback hopefully from a growth mindset perspective. It's not always about the answer. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's about the process and that learning. And what if you tried the question in math, or the question in physics, or debriefing the conversation that you see in language? Let's try to understand it from a different perspective. For you as parents, for us as parents, having an understanding that this is what we're trying to get at in the classrooms, and how you might support those in your conversations or the activities that you're doing at home with your children. We put out 2 guides here on assessment and evaluation, one for elementary, the blue one, and one for secondary, which is the green one. I'll just leave these up here, you can read through these, and we have a question. Thank you. So the question is, we're talking about some of the things, the changes in education, and maybe you're not seeing it in the classroom. That's an opportunity, I think, for us to engage and continue a conversation with the teachers, with the school, with your child about how to work through that. So when I work with parents in my day job, in my role, we talk about curriculum. We talk about, okay, what does the first, the front matter of that curriculum say we need to be doing? Differentiating, assessing, thinking in levels of proficiency, providing some information to maybe help that conversation or help the parent have that conversation with the school teacher, right? We're on a journey here. I mean, we're learning a lot about the human brain. We're learning a lot about how it develops, and that has influenced how we teach. But I throw it back to you, to the conversation.
Some of my question is it a platform that everyone in the world from all of this information can hold? So I don't necessarily find that on individual teachers or
Yeah. Certainly we understand. And that's why we have opportunities like this to provide opportunities of information for you to continue that conversation along. We certainly work with principals and vice principals and teachers as well to continue this conversation. Absolutely. So my suggestion would be to continue to work with your teachers, with your children's teachers, with the school's administration as well, and be having, if you picked up anything today, just be having those conversations. Where's the evidence of that? Okay? I think we're just going to wrap it up with just a few statements. We're just about to the end of our presentation here. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about quality versus quantity, or whether yeah, okay.
Just briefly, and because I think this probably addresses a little bit that question, is I think when we went to school, and I can see early in my career, the fishbowl on the left is basically how I went. There were a lot of work to do, hand in your work. There's some kind of magical formula that's going to happen at the end, and we're going to have an average. And that's how we understood the world of A&E. We're shifting right now, and when we're saying we're shifting, that means that there's a lot of discussions and things and it takes time for people to reshape and rethink how we do this. So one of the things I'd like to say, let's be patient with this, but let's ask the questions. Because on the right, what we're trying to do is to say, we're changing philosophy a little bit about maybe reducing the amount of work that happens in the classroom towards doing work, looking at work, getting a lot of feedback on work, and redoing the work. And that's a huge cultural shift, but really what we're trying to do is to say that's an important part of learning is by redoing things. And teachers and all of the appareil of learning is moving towards that. And because what we're really aiming for is quality of work at the end there. But learners need to know where they are in the development. All yours, monsieur. Sorry if I'm being too long.
So relatively short period of time that we have together and a lot of information to cover, but we did want you to know that we're thinking a lot, and I think we need to be thinking about what school-home collaboration looks like. And certainly it is our belief that it does, it's cliche, but it does take a village to raise a child, which means you have to have the information about curriculum, right? We have to work through the changes in education as well to get our kids ready for the 21st century, but also recognize we're in the 21st century. And so our classrooms need to be changing as well and being influenced by what research is saying. So we've got some copies of curriculum documents up here. They're linked. All of the material that your children are learning, K to 12, is posted on the ministry website, Ministry of Education. Again, we don't make this up. These are frameworks by which we design our classrooms. There's also information about Learning for All, which is around special education. Also information from Growing Success, the green document, which is about how we are assessing more and judging less to facilitate that learning. So we talked a little bit about growth mindset. We talked a little bit about curriculum areas and shifts in our beliefs. And hopefully we've given you a few suggestions when you're with your children, asking the question and asking it from a growth mindset. When you're supporting your children and they're bumping up against something that is challenging for them and embracing that and thinking about how we can work through using our resilience and our critical thinking. We'll be around, it's lunchtime now, but we'll be around for some minutes if you would like to come up and continue the conversation with us. Thanks very much.